I think this was solely driven by Google's inability to control and dictate the marketplace and have that full land grab that they were hoping to achieve by Privacy Sandbox. As soon as it became very, very clear that the regulators weren't going to play ball, for me, it rang of a petulant child who didn't get their own way.
They do have to compete on these privacy things. And so, obviously Google is a big company with lots of interests, but the browser teams, they want something super private so they can go head to head. So I think that's a pretty important motivator for them.
Using my own words against me, Andrew. Kudos to you. But
I do think, though, when you think about their approaches, it does go back to that in the sense of Apple really wants to come out strong and flashy, and they're not that dependent on the ad-served ecosystem. They have much less of a monopoly power than Google does in their way. Google is both in some ways more scrutinized, but also they do depend on this. This is their sort of bread and butter. And
whether it's the right split of budgets and all of these important questions is still to be known.
Welcome to Decentriq Deconstructs, a series to help marketers navigate the quickly evolving advertising landscape. In each episode, we'll be breaking down the latest in MarTech and ad tech, providing you with the insights you need to stay ahead and connect with your audience. Join us as Decentriq deconstructs complex topics to help you reach your best customers in the new era of digital marketing. So today we'll be covering the topic of third-party cookie deprecation, or is it even going to happen anymore? So after many years of delaying this third-party cookie deprecation D-Day, essentially Google just recently announced that they'll no longer be doing this. And in this episode, I'd really like to cover with you guys, why do you think they made this decision? Is it similar to some of the other moves by other browsers in the past? And essentially, what does it mean for those marketers who have already embarked on cookieless journeys or have yet to do so? So let's start with that. Maybe we can kick off with a quick overview of what exactly Google said and what do you guys think that this means?
Yeah, sure. I think everyone has been talking about Google deprecating third-party cookies for, it feels like a lifetime, but it's certainly been a number of years. And, the recent announcement confirmed to somewhat lack of surprise, I guess, that Google will not be doing a hard stop in terms of third-party cookie deprecation, but will in fact push that choice onto the consumer. So effectively, consumers will have the option to opt out of third-party cookie tracking.
I think that sums it up pretty well. So yeah, I think it's the exact timeline I think is still not exactly clear, but that in a similar timeline, users will be able to turn on a mode that will block all third-party cookies. Or not, or accept that they're going to leave it on.
And how does this measure up to what Apple did 3 years back, where users essentially have to opt in to tracking and the sharing of their IDFAs? Would this be something similar?
On the surface, this looks like it's sort of the opposite side of the coin, where you sort of have to opt in to block rather than to opt in to track. In the sense of, the iOS update that pushed those changes was pretty abrupt and happened pretty quickly and, affected basically everybody unless you sort of went out of your way not to. So that's, I think, what people were expecting before the Google announcement, that the Google one would happen in a sort of similar way, even though it wasn't quite so, quick to market. But that there would just sort of be a date when, in this update, it would ship and it would change, but this is basically a reversal of that. So this is a different approach where, I think you should expect a lot of people to opt out, but it won't be sort of opted out by default.
Yeah, I think Andrew's hit the nail on the head there, right? With Apple's, the ATT Apple tracking transparency, it was really in your face and it was really abrupt. I think Apple did a great job there in, really putting itself in top of the privacy mantle. If you think about whenever you get a new app on your phone, for those of us who have iPhones, there are other mobile phone providers available, of course, but you are instantly asked of what tracking, if you're going to allow that app to track you for one-time use, for forever or for never. And I think it's really, really powerful. I suspect Google will go a slightly different way, as Andrew suggested, where it's not as easy or as forthright to opt out of tracking your so you probably won't see as high numbers initially. But I think, ultimately you will still start to, get to those same kind of numbers. With Apple, it's almost a 70% instant drop off of third party cookies, if not slightly higher. So I think with Google, it will be a much smaller number to start with, but ultimately you'll probably get to those same kind of levels over time.
I do think it is important to think, there are separate things. There's sort of the app transparency stuff, and there's the browser cookie prevention stuff. So in Apple, those went hand in hand in the same update. But for there's iOS and Android, which are like the app things, and then there's WebKit and sort of Chromium, which are the browser ones. So it's I think the announcement, my understanding of the announcement earlier by Google was this is pretty specifically about the browser side of the world, and not necessarily about the Android OS side of the world.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point, Andrew. But I think, ultimately, look, the end result for me is that we were all expecting a hard stop on third-party cookies. We no longer have that. But I think, it's still fair to say that third-party cookies will go away, but they're just going to have a very slow and painful death rather than a kind of more immediate one. But ultimately, they will be a thing of the past. Just when that fully happens is yet to be known.
So you do say slow and painful, but I think for a lot of people, this will actually be a lot less painful, which is maybe part of the point, right? In some ways, this is an elegant way for them to go out, in the sense they're going to sort of, like slowly fade to a whisper rather than go out with a bang, which I think, will I think there will still be a bump, right? Whenever this update ships, like a lot of people will say no on day one, but it does mean that there's maybe like a slower transition period, that like people will have time to see some of the effects before it completely goes away. I do think we're sort of assuming here, I think we both believe that, or all of us believe that cookies will continue to diminish and diminish and diminish and eventually may go away completely, but that, this just means there's going to be a bit more graceful transition time, which I think is what a lot of the people were hoping for anyway, right? The people that the people pushing for this to slow down and push back and so forth. That sort of has been their hope the whole time.
And on that note, let's backtrack a bit, because I'm really curious about why you guys think that Google made this decision. I don't think anyone was really expecting it with those delays that they were pushing back for so many years. We thought maybe there'd be another pushback, but this was really a change. So why do you guys think they announced that?
I mean, I'll take a stab, and I'm pretty forthright in what I think, but I think this was solely driven by Google's inability to control and dictate the marketplace and have that full land grab that they were hoping to achieve by Privacy Sandbox. As soon as it became very, very clear that the regulators weren't going to play ball, that businesses that they paid to test Privacy Sandbox gave, quite scathing feedback on it, and the uproar in the general marketplace to the way that Google were approaching it. For me, it rang of a petulant child who didn't get their own way. If they couldn't get their own way, they were going to change course.
So I do think it, the land grab narrative certainly has been important, but I do think it's actually really important to think about the browser wars, because I do think sort of the browser wars, that's an old term, but I think that stuff sort of still rages. And sort of, Dan, at the beginning of this call, you said, Apple was able to claim a really top privacy spot and really show that they're a leader in privacy. And I do think that, Chrome and WebKit and Chrome and Safari and Android and iOS really do compete on these terms. And people do think about am I going to buy a new iPhone, or am I going to buy a new, Note 76 or whatever, because of, or I'm going to buy a new Android phone based on these privacy features. but I think it's just really important. Like they do have to compete on these privacy things. And so, obviously Google is a big company with lots of interests, but like, the browser teams, like they want something super private so they can go head to head. So I think that's like a pretty important motivator for them.
Using my own words against me, Andrew. Kudos to you. But yeah, no, I think you've raised a really important point, right? And I think if you're going to see this war or battle, as you so aptly put it, really come to the fore. I mean, Apple have already gone on the front foot with their new advertising campaign, which I don't know if everyone has seen who listens in, but I implore you to watch it. It's basically a take on Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds, which is just a very scary concept of a movie anyway, but it really sets Apple's stall out as to where they think privacy should be for the consumer and everyone that is browsing the internet. And I think we'll maybe see something from Chrome that will be equally as creative in the not too distant future.
I do think though when you think about their approaches, it does go back to that in the sense of like Apple really wants to come out strong and flashy, and like that is a big part of their identity, and they're not that dependent on the ad served ecosystem, right? Like that's not really a big part of Apple's bottom dollar, and it's not, and like they have much less of a monopoly power than Google does in their way, right? Like I think there's not a lot of reason to think about like antitrust stuff against them in a lot of ways. So Google is both in some ways more scrutinized, but also they do depend on this. This is their sort of bread and butter, and so like their need to have something that's a little less abrupt showed in this.
Yeah, no, agreed.
On this whole browser war side, I mean, I'm not sure if a lot of people know, but you can already opt out of tracking with Chrome. And they say that almost 40% of users actually opt out already. So we're still seeing a lot of marketers saying, oh, great, they're not deprecating it anymore, no more D-Day. But from the conversation we're having over the past few minutes, it's not necessarily that there won't be a D-Day, but things are still going to continue to decline. So I'm just curious, what do you guys think about those marketers who are, either breathing a sigh of relief or not? What advice do you have for them?
Well, I do have a comment. So there may not be a D-Day, right? But there may still be an invasion, just at a slower, more paced scale, to continue the metaphor. But no, I think some people may be thinking about this as like, oh, the thing was canceled. Things are going to go back to normal. And I don't think that's realistic. I think it's maybe a little bit more like, there's supposed to be some big pitch or some big test or something, on Friday, but like, oh, no, we're not going to do that. Like we'll have a couple more smaller tests over the next few weeks, right? Like it is a moment of relief that like, there's not going to be this like moment where everything's going to be decided. But I think the responsibility and the need to think about what stuff looks like with less cookie access and so forth continues. It's just not as like urgent and burning, but I think it's still is super important.
Yeah, I think the way actually you put that question right was exactly the way I personally saw it on my LinkedIn feed. As soon as that news broke, it was almost instantaneous splitting into two camps. The group that were adamant and in my opinion, rightly so, to continue on this cookieless path, to really understand that all of the challenges of third-party cookies that they present to marketers, to consumers, to privacy still remain. And that, a lot of that work and investment and time that they've put into this cookieless future hasn't been wasted and should actually, continue with gusto. And then, of course, as Andrew rightly pointed out, there's that group of that are maybe relieved, and the reasons for that relief could be manyfold, right? It could be relief that they don't have a pressing date that's creeping upon them. They don't have to change from what they're used to. They don't have to invest in areas that they don't want to invest. and that investment, it could be significant for a lot of businesses as they go or think about going cookieless. They don't have to lose some of their measurement metrics that they so fondly care about, but I definitely see it splitting into these two very, very clear camps of carry on forward, keep going, keep thinking, keep testing, keep looking at the alternatives. It's great. I don't have to worry about it for a little bit longer. Or maybe, some of those in the relief camp are simply thinking about pushing budgets into walled gardens. I think we've covered on one of our previous, podcasts that walled gardens are a great option. If you're thinking about an easy route to cookieless or to away from third-party cookies, they make a lot of sense for a lot of marketers. Whether it's the right split of budgets and all of these important questions is still to be known, but I think it could be that as well.
Yeah, and we also covered in that first episode that users actually don't spend the majority of their time on walled gardens; they do on the open internet. So what could that mean, and what are those implications if you just shift more of your budget there? Sorry, Andrew, please continue.
No, I wanted one thing that struck me when Dan was just talking was that this idea of investment, because I do think that's so much of this conversation is driven by this idea of investment and cost and opportunity cost, and this certainly has changed the math on that a little bit, right? I think there's been a lot of people who've already been very hesitant to switch because the first mover advantage for moving to cookieless is not super clear, right? Like you want to be prepared, but you don't it's not necessarily that you're going to get huge returns by being first to market with cookieless. It's more like you'll be better prepared to navigate the future. But so it's not like pouring a ton of stuff to blaze the way and be a leader for that, is a strategy, but it's not clear that that's an awesome, return on that. So I think there's definitely a little bit of herd mindset, which is totally justified in the sense of maybe not wanting to put in the extra effort to forge ahead first, but to sort of follow the convention a little bit. And I think for a lot of companies, they kind of want someone else to push forward first, and then they can sort of follow in the path and do the standard thing. Once there's some agreement on consensus of this is the new way things should work, then people will do that, but they don't want to be the one necessarily setting that because they don't see that it necessarily has a huge advantage other than, being a little bit more prepared.
That's actually a super interesting point, Andrew. Maybe it's the way that, the market talks about this, right? Moving away from third-party cookies. Maybe it should be more about moving towards first-party data, and that leading the way. Because when you think about first-party data, right, it does have, some advantages, and you'll definitely have advantages if you have a first-party data strategy, if you have a consent policy, if you're able to utilize that first-party data. Now we can, we see a number of brands that are already, generating great results. So maybe it's the message that goes out to market, and it should be less about moving away and maybe moving more towards.
No, that's great. I think it's brilliant framing, and of course you've tied it back to our own marketing messages that we've been using for a long time. But I do think it does make sense, right? Moving towards first party data always had a benefit, and that is what we've advocated in the past. And it has a benefit even if third party cookies are not being deprecated, right? That does have advantage and investment, and that first party advantage. So for brands and publishers that have a lot of first party data, in some ways this almost might be irrelevant news for them because they can get a ton of benefit from that stuff. I think it may change the math a lot for people that don't have access to first party data or easy ways to work with it. But for brands that have that potential hasn't gone anywhere, right? And it's always had the potential to really do much better than third party could have. And
in the world of first party data tying into cookieless solutions, do you have any insight on what and how other cookieless solutions could be affected by this Google news? Maybe you, Andrew?
I have some thoughts about this. So one thing I have long been skeptical of is how well the identity graph solutions would fare in the face of cookie loss. I think there's many people have thought of identity solutions as an antidote for cookie deprecation. But I've not been sure of that because a lot of the leading solutions do have cookie stuff and third-party stuff as key elements of the identity spine. And so I think, in this world, it's going to be a little more, since it's going to be a little more graceful, the drop off, maybe it's going to give those solutions a smoother ride to figure out how to transition, in the sense of like, there may have been a big hiccup for some of those ID solutions on the cookie drop dead date. And now I think it may be a little bit like, maybe there will still be a hiccup, but it'll be a bit smaller and less noticeable. And so I think that that test about like how much ID solutions really depend on cookies, I think we won't have as conclusive an answer to that as we might have if there had been a drop dead date.
Yeah, I'd be inclined to agree. ID graphs, ID solutions were the ones that kind of stuck out to me. But again, like people are going on this, on these various different journeys. I think so are the ID solution providers, right, Andrew? I mean, I think it's fair to say there are some pretty strong ID solutions out there that don't rely on third-party cookies, that have a kind of clear consent message, that have an opt-in, et cetera, et cetera. I think they're going to grow in popularity, but I think you raised a really interesting point, right? Maybe the marketers who are most relieved are the marketers that are leveraging tools that have kind of some cookie work in the background. Yeah. I didn't put it in my suggestion, but
yeah, it is. The thing is, the ID solutions, it's hard to lump them together because they work under such different principles, right? But I think I was personally a little excited to see like, maybe we would see some indication that some of them were performing better than others when the cookies went away. Like maybe some would thrive and some would fall off. And now I feel like it's going to be a lot less pronounced, and you're going to have, maybe a little bit less clarity about, I think like over a long period of time, I think it will become more and more clear as people are able to understand the actual return on investment they're getting with these solutions. But I think it may have, it may have been crisper, it may have been a sharper data point for marketers understanding the effects of these, how different ID solutions might be, that we won't necessarily have that sharp inflection point.
Actually, I know your job's to ask the questions, but if you could allow me just to ask Andrew one that's top of mind. Andrew, how do you think this is going to play out in the actual market, right? Because there's a lot of brands that need education, that are, testing and learning with different solutions. Do you think it's just going to elongate that process, or do you think it's actually going to shape the market moving forward? So, again, going back to this kind of two camp analogies, there's going to be the brands that have gone through and done it. And then eventually that pain piece, that hurt of signal loss or addressability is going to become a pincer point for everyone else just to follow suit. Or do you think there's something potentially undiscovered out there?
No. So I do think like, because the timing changes, the shape changes as well. Right, like those things are deeply intertwined in terms of the journeys that brands and publishers go on. I am, I do think there's still undiscovered stuff that may be exciting for people, that they may stumble into around this. But I think I just think there's going to be a much less of a aha moment, eureka moment, where people realize like, oh man, like, this just didn't work at all. Like, I think it'll be more subtle. You're going to have to do A/B tests and actually tease the data out of the graphs a little bit better. It's not going to be the kind of thing where there was such a big step function you don't need to do the regression. You can just see it on the chart. I think that's going to complicate that. But no, I mean, I think there's still a ton of space for new improvements and things. And but I think with this, it is interesting that I think it may be turning a corner for a lot of people. Right. In terms of this may be the beginning of the end of talking about cookie deprecation. Right. And people not that privacy and first party data and something like that are going away, but that the conversation, we just framed it moving towards first party data may become a thing. Talking about regulation resilience may take a stronger, when people think about privacy and consent and stuff like that, it may have much more to do with are we complying with the intent of the law and not just the letter of it, so that if the law were to shift very slightly, we wouldn't be at risk. Yeah. So I think that kind of stuff will become increasingly important because this sort of urgent fire is dying down a bit.
On that side, I really see this need to build resilience to any kind of drastic changes that people are or may not be making. So based on the conversation you guys had, thank you so much. But essentially, third-party cookies are declining, and if you want any efficient campaign spend, you need to explore some cookieless solutions out there, 100%. And in the next episode, actually, we will be talking about exactly this. So what are the different cookieless solutions out there? What are the different tools that you can garner in your box, be it first-party data, talking about ID solutions, etc. So thank you guys so much for joining me on this conversation, and looking forward to the next one.